Hello, and welcome to the Badger Talks podcast, the podcast that shares interviews with experts from the University of Wisconsin-Madison community about their work, research, and a little bit about what they're like as people, too. I'm your host, Buzz Kemper. Today, we're focusing on plants in space, and I'm happy to have as my guest Dr. Simon Gilroy, researcher and professor in the Botany Department of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I love that it says, Dr. Gilroy's research interests include plant cell biology, signal transduction, lipid signaling, tip growth, and tropisms. So, first of all, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for the invitation.
Yeah. And secondly, we're going to talk about the space stuff. The space stuff is way cool, but tell us about what do these terms mean, and outside of the space station, what are you studying about plants?
Yeah. I mean, those are just very sciencey words for the things that you totally know how plants work.
Okay.
So everyone in the lab, I'm the front person for like a really talented group of people, and everyone in the lab is kind of interested in how do plants work. They know what's going on around them, but they don't have a brain.
Okay.
They perceive the world, whatever we mean by perceive. You know, we understand what we mean by perceive, but plants have to know what's going on, probably more than we do, because if something bad is happening around you, you can just get up and leave.
Yeah.
And you don't really have to know what it is, you just have to know it's bad. But if you're a plant, you have no option for crawling away, so you've got to know exactly what's going on in the world around you. And the plants are incredibly resilient to the environment. They're super productive. But how do they put all of that together? So how do they know what's going on in the world around them and then take that information and process it must be a very different way from the way that we do, but solve the same kind of issues that we have. I mean, they have to feed themselves somehow. They have to drink, they have to get water. How do they do that? It's a different way, but it's solving the same biological problem that we have. And everyone in the lab is super interested in, like, how do you put that package together? Because it's what we do as human beings, but done in a very, very different way.
You just opened up the door to like 57 questions. I love this. So they don't have a brain, but you did use the word perceive, and we, like you said, we know that's true because they adapt to different situations, even though we know that they can't just run away. So what have you learned about the way that plants perceive? What are they perceiving, and what are they doing to react to those perceptions?
Well, so first of all, we have to be very careful because perceive comes with a lot of human connotations.
Yes.
So let's strip those away and just say that what we mean by perceive is that there are things going on in the world around you, and somehow you have to work out what that is occurring and internalize that and have some kind of mechanism to deal with it, to generate information inside yourself, and then work out how to trigger things, like in your own biology. And we do that with the brain and nerves and muscles, and plants have the same problems, which is what's going on in the world around them. And they're going to have sensory systems. The sensory systems are going to be very different from ours, and they're going to be able to take the outside world and move it inside the plant into some sort of informational network. That's going to be very, very different from ours, and they're going to trigger things, and the things they trigger are going to be different from what we do. Plants tend to trigger things like growth and development and flowering and all of the planty things that everyone kind of sees around them. Yeah.
I love that phrase.
But the things that in the lab that we would really love to know is what's that internal information processing system? Because it's very, very different from ours. And we know a lot more about it. And I think the rule is that as technology gets better and as we get better at being able to measure things and see things, the complexity inside the plant goes up every single time. And to give an example of that, technology was recently delivered to let you visualize the signals that are generated inside plants in real time. And we haven't been able to really get at that before. And so we can basically take a plant, stick a microscope and a camera on it, and we can see it generate signals inside itself. And you go like, oh, well, okay, so what happens when an insect starts chewing on a leaf? And you might go, oh, well, I kind of know as a gardener that plants aren't just passive. They're going to be eaten, right? And they don't really have any choice. The insect's there, but they're going to defend themselves. And one of the ways they defend themselves is they switch on nasty chemicals and all the great stuff about being a plant. And that all feels very slow, right? And you there's a description of plants as slow life. But now we have this technology to kind of peer inside them. And what we see is as soon as the jaws of the insect clamp down on the leaf, the plant generates signals. And within seconds, those signals have moved throughout the entire plant. And so the plant, bits of the plant which aren't being eaten, absolutely know that another part of that same individual is being eaten, and they switch on their defenses preemptively. So the more we get to sort of the technology lets us peer inside the plant, the more we begin to go like, well, if you're a plant biologist, it's not necessarily that surprising. Plants are hugely dynamic. They respond really, really quickly. But that's because they're biology and they're alive. And that's what being alive is. You have to respond in the time frame of seconds. Otherwise, you're not going to be around for that long. As human beings, it's just intrinsic to us. We totally know about it because it's how we work. But that's how our biology works. And the reason we often don't sort of appreciate it is because we just don't see it happening. But it's totally there in the background.
So these signals you're talking about, either at the time of the insect's jaw clamping down or even perhaps beforehand, that there is a signal that is generated. Let's start with that. What is that signal? Is it an electrical signal? Is it how would one describe it?
All right, so now you have asked the questions that everyone is asking.
Yeah.
Because now we know those signals exist, and so what are they? And we can take a model from human beings and go, well, how would we respond? And then we would think of nerve conduction and electrical signals. There are no nerves in plants, so it can't be the same system.
Right.
But when we look at it, there are chemical messengers which are produced. A lot of them are very, very similar to us because biology is biology. And a great way of thinking about how biology operates is once it's solved a problem, it doesn't reinvent the solution. So, in our past, biology worked out how to deal with generating rapid signals, and that same machinery is just throughout all biology. So some of our nerve conduction is based on changes in the level of the calcium ions in the cells. Plants do exactly the same thing. They're doing it in a different way. So it's not nerve conduction. It's absolutely not the same process, but it's accomplishing the same end.
Okay. Wow, that's just absolutely fascinating. And then the reaction, and again, let's use the insect eating the leaf thing. And I imagine that this probably is changing from one type of plant to another. But what then, once these signals are generated and the plant begins to react, what form would that reaction take? Does it release a toxin that makes itself less palatable to the bug, or what does it do?
Yeah, I mean, if there's a thing that plants are really good at doing is making stuff. So they are
good.
They are amazing chemical factories. And you think that many of our drugs have just come from plants because of their ability to just make a huge array of diverse things. And the reason that many drugs work is because they affect animal physiology. The plants aren't doing it like altruistically to produce a drug for us. They're producing things which are going to have some action on like an insect or a herbivore. So one of the defaults that they do is they switch on a whole bunch of chemistry, and it's very, very clever chemical warfare. So they make toxins, right, which is the obvious one. Just poison the thing that's eating you, and then it's gone.
Make yourself unpleasant or poisonous.
But you can be really sneaky about it. So a lot of plants produce proteins that inhibit the digestive enzymes of the insects. So it's like death by slow starvation. And so there's a million different examples of it where plants are just very good at having made a chemical, but they don't want to make it all the time. These, they're kind of expensive to make.
Right.
And so,
I imagine there is a cost.
Yeah. And so you only want to pay the cost when you need to.
Yeah.
And so you wait for the insect to start chewing, and then now everything has got to be rapid, right? Because if you wait a day, you are not going to be there because that insect will have eaten you. So we're talking about seconds to minutes of the signals to be generated, and then the chemistry has to be switched on in kind of the same time frame because you want to pack a leaf with these nasty, noxious chemicals, and that leaf wants to be right next to the one which is being eaten. You want to defend the one that's just being eaten as well, but you've got to kind of do this pervasive signal throughout the whole body, because that insect, if it was just local, the insect would just move to another leaf.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I imagine, given the complexity of evolution, that the bugs are probably fighting back by developing various ways to resist these chemicals, and it's probably an ongoing warfare, right?
Yeah. It's an arms
race.
race.
A slow motion war.
Yeah. And no one ever wins.
Yeah.
Because everyone takes a step forward, and then the next person takes a step, and it's always this balancing act. But biology is awesome. So insects are in this arms race with the plants. The plants defend themselves. Absolutely classic, like Wisconsin example of how that plays out is monarch butterflies.
Okay.
So monarch butterflies eat milkweeds, and they defend themselves with the chemicals that they get from what they're eating.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, absolutely terrific. And that is a very great Wisconsin example. We've talked a little bit off mic about your colleagues who are taking plants and they're bringing them to Hawaii, or they're bringing them to this country or that country, and look how far away they are. You have won that race. You have plants in space. So let's talk about, first of all, why, and then we'll proceed from there. But you've got plants on the space station.
Yep.
Okay. So what are you hoping to learn?
So the space biology, growing plants in space, kind of comes with two directions. One of them is a very practical direction, and one of them is basic science. And when you can get those two to work together, that is the awesome experiment. So the basic science questions are all related to the fact that the Earth is a fantastic place to live. I really like it. I think we should keep it.
Yeah, I'm not moving.
Yeah. But the reason it's a fantastic place is because the conditions on the Earth protect biology, and our biology has evolved to be really, really good at working in the environment that we live in. It's had millions of years to get very good at it. And there are some components that are just intrinsic in the background of living on the Earth that affect all biology. And one of them, like maybe even the most pervasive force that you can imagine, is gravity. It affects absolutely everything. Yeah. And on the surface of the Earth, it's 1 times gravity, and it's been a constant for the entire history of all life. And so we have kind of grown up with that as a background. And so it shapes our biology, and in lots of different ways. And there's some obvious ones that everyone can just think of. Everyone knows up from down. Right? And when we walk around, your head is always pointing up, and hopefully your feet are always pointing down. Right? So,
unless you're a circus performer, yes, that's normal.
And think of plant biology, and the classic: roots grow down, shoots grow up. And if you take a tomato plant and flip it upside down, so the shoot's pointing down, the shoots will grow down and turn around and grow back up again. So there's an intrinsic component of gravity that shapes how biology works at many, many levels.
Right.
And so we would love to know how that works. How does it affect biology? Yeah. And the classic way to do an experiment is, well, if gravity is an important shaper of biology, what does biology look when I remove gravity? Yeah. That turns out to be a very difficult experiment to do. Yeah. And I always get asked the question, when you go down to NASA, are you using their anti-gravity machines? If I knew of an anti-gravity machine, I'd be in my mansion on the beach. I'd be the richest person in the world. Because if we had anti-gravity machines, aircraft would be very, very different. Yeah. But there is no anti-gravity machine.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I've never heard of one either outside of science fiction. So right.
But we want to do these experiments where we want to understand how gravity works, and we want to remove gravity. And it turns out there are ways to get very, very short periods of times, like being in space, but we're talking about dropping things in these things called drop towers, and you get like a few seconds of free fall. Oh, sure. And free fall gives you the same environment as a weightless environment of space. Right. So I can drop things, and I'll get like 4 or 5 seconds. Yeah. And it's like, we can't do an experiment in 4 or 5 seconds. We can't grow a plant in 4 or 5 seconds. No. The other way to do it on Earth, which is not really on Earth, is you get in an aircraft and you do parabolic flight. So you zoom up and you get to the top, like on a roller coaster. And you know when you're on a roller coaster and you just go over the top and you kind of like, whoa!
Yeah.
Imagine that feeling.
And then your stomach goes up into your throat.
That is you going into free fall. That is like being in space. And with that parabolic flight, you can accomplish like maybe 30 seconds.
Okay.
But again, we can't grow a plant in 30 seconds.
Right.
And who wants to go up and down on a roller coaster like 2,000 times?
Yeah, no thank you.
So the reality is that if we want to understand all of these interactions, how gravity makes biology work as kind of one of the most fundamental shapers of what biology does, there's only one place we can go. So we go into space.
Go into space.
Yeah.
And how long have your plants been on the space station?
So as of today, they have been there for 4 days.
4 days?
Yeah.
Okay. And who is observing them, or how are they being observed?
Yeah, so wouldn't it be awesome? We would love to go up there.
Yeah, I was going to say, they forgot to bring you.
Yeah. But strangely enough, they don't let us up there. So there are a bunch of astronauts on the space station. Astronauts are absolutely amazing people. Like, if you just hang out with them, they're just very normal people. They're people like every other person that you're going to meet.
Yeah.
But they have this crazy awesome job.
Yeah.
And they are incredibly good at paying attention. They can read protocols and they will parse them, and they'll be very good at doing exactly what you are asking them to do. They're fantastic. And they're very thoughtful and they're very knowledgeable. So if you're asking them to do you ask them to do something stupid, they'll tell you, like, I don't think this is going to work.
Yeah.
And so we have astronauts NASA has astronauts on the space station.
Right.
And they are our hands.
Okay.
So they will do the manipulations, and we get video and we get photographs of the experiment running. And when the experiment gets towards its end and we have to do more complicated manipulations, because the thing that we really want to get back is the pictures. The pictures are going to be absolutely mind-blowing.
Yeah.
But we want to get our plants back as well.
Right.
And so that, you imagine, is kind of a little bit tricky. But there are freezers on the space station. There's a deep freeze up there. And so what the astronauts will do is freeze our samples and bring back the frozen material for us. But that is a very complicated set of manipulations. But they are our hands for doing that.
Okay. So it's only been 4 days. So it's very possible that your answer to the next question is going to be nothing yet. But what have you learned?
You would think I would say nothing yet.
I would think so. But you're going to surprise me.
Well, we got our first set of pictures back. So we have, so you imagine that we send up the plants, they're ungerminated seeds. And because of the experiment we do, we inoculate them with a little bit of fungal spores, because the experiment we're interested in is the interaction between the two organisms.
Okay.
And in 2 days, the plants have already started to germinate, and the fungal spores have already germinated and start to make a fungal mass. And it's faster than we were expecting. But at the moment, we don't know whether that's a result or just, we want to have a result. And so we're looking at it, and we'll interpret anything we see at 2 days.
Yeah.
We don't know yet what we're seeing, but we are definitely, the biology is totally working.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
What plants are up there, and how did you select the types of plants that you were sending? I mean, you could have sent poison ivy or a pineapple. I mean, right?
That is true.
Yeah.
So the plants which are up there are red robin variety of tomato.
Okay.
The reason for choosing that is NASA has a bunch of things called target crops. And so one of the ideas is this idea that space is a place to do these experiments to understand how biology works. But there's also a practical component of it. We would like to grow plants in space, and we would like to do it really well, because we would like to provide fresh fruit and vegetables for astronauts. And there's lots of reasons to want to do that. We're not anywhere near the idea of space agriculture where we could feed the astronauts, because just the space isn't there yet.
Right.
But the steps are being taken that in order to be able to have fresh produce. And there's lots of reasons to want to do that. One of the big ones is space is a really hard place for biology to live. That's true for plants, but it's also true for the astronauts.
Yeah.
And you know that thing of like, you should eat lots of fresh fruit and vegetables because they're good for you.
Yeah.
That doesn't change when you go into space.
Right.
So fresh fruit and vegetables is a big deal. Every time that a rocket goes up to the space station, part of the payload is food, and part of that payload is going to be the fresh food that you might imagine. And it's not going to be special astronaut food. It's going to be real regular human ground food.
Right.
It's going to be apples and all the things that you would imagine.
Right. It's not a bag of Purina astronaut chow.
Exactly, yeah. And it's a big deal. Like, astronauts totally love it because most of the time it is astronaut food, and it's freeze-dried and it's reconstituted and it's really good, but it's not fresh food.
Right.
And so there's a huge psychological benefit to growing your own food, and anyone who's a gardener totally knows the psychology that comes with nurturing your own plant and then eating it. And just the living things around you is a big deal because the space station's a very built environment. It's like being in a hospital. Right? And so there's a lot of psychological components of having growing things, and especially growing things that have a goal to be eaten. And the nutritional value of the fresh vegetables is a big plus to the diet.
Yeah.
And there are many, many vitamins that and nutrients that we can't store for hugely long periods of time.
Right.
And so, especially when you start thinking of, well, if the goal is to go to Mars, which we're going to do, eventually there are going to be boots on the ground on Mars.
Right.
That is a 9-month trip to get there. And so there's a lot of moving parts, and one of the big moving parts that you have to work out how to do is how not only to feed astronauts, but keep them healthy. And so tomatoes turn out to be a really good element of that whole thing, and part of a NASA target crop program. A lot of the other target crops fulfill a requirement of grow something where you eat nearly everything that you've grown. And so things like leafy greens, like lettuces and cabbages, are absolutely awesome for that.
Yeah, almost all edible.
And then NASA also has a program, this is absolutely awesome, where they go out to, it's a collaboration with a botanic garden in Miami, Fairchild Botanic Garden. They go out to high schools, and they literally give the high school students the seeds and a little growth chamber, and the students grow up the plants, and they rate them. How well do they grow? Are they good? Would I eat these? And that goes into a big database, and that is absolutely used to choose the crops.
Terrific. Makes absolute sense.
Yeah.
I'd love to do this for an hour and a half, but but in the interest of keeping this reasonably succinct, what do you do when you're not studying plants in space? Do you have hobbies, passions, interests? What gets your mind active in other ways?
Yeah, I always say, so I'm a plant scientist, a botanist, and that comes with a massive occupational hazard.
Which is
gardening.
That's so funny. Your hobby is plants. I would not have guessed that, but okay. Yeah.
And so, for instance, the Wisconsin State Fair is coming up.
Yeah.
Coming up in the distant future.
Yeah.
But there are things like vegetable competitions and flower competitions in there.
Yeah.
And they are just so much fun.
Okay.
Like, who is going to grow the biggest tomato? Who's going to grow the biggest onion? Tallest sunflower?
Yeah.
And so totally, that's what me and my wife end up doing for most of the spring.
All right, terrific. So your tomatoes are going to see if they can kick the rear end of the other tomatoes at the state fair.
Maybe not kick the rear end, but we would like to. We'll try and do something which is competitive. But Wisconsin has a lot of very, very good growers.
Yes, I would imagine so. This is absolutely fascinating stuff. A wonderful conversation. I've enjoyed it so much. Dr. Simon Gilroy, researcher and professor in the Botany Department at UW-Madison, and working with plants, terrestrial and beyond. Absolutely terrific. Thank you.
My pleasure.
You've been listening to the Badger Talks podcast. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Dr. Simon Gilroy. Please browse our previous episodes for other topics that may be of interest to you. The Badger Talks podcast is a creation of UW Connects and produced at Audio for the Arts Recording Studios in Madison, Wisconsin. Our music is If You Want to Be a Badger, written by Julian Olson and performed by the UW Marching Band. I'm Buzz Kemper. Thank you for listening.